Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is Josh. Over to my left on the screen, you see Corstian. We did our quarterbacks last week, so really excited to detail. That was a quick wave right there.
Gotta be quick.
Wow. Are you training to be in Cobra Kai seasons? Is that what's going on? Or season 6?
I'll be in the next Cobra Kai season. I'll be a villain. I'll do something weird or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Corstian's practicing his wax on, wax off to discuss these running backs. So very exciting news coming out of the preseason. I'm really excited to see Caleb play the way he did. I'm really enjoying watching Hard Knocks. It's giving me more confidence in the regime, just watching Eberflus and how he is and whatnot. So I'm really enjoying the preseason show. And Corstian, you got to be happy about how Bo Nix is doing as well.
Yeah, he looked really good. I feel like all the rookies really looked good this preseason from what we've seen.
Yeah, no, and the one thing to keep in mind too is these defenses are going to tend to be very vanilla, just to make sure that everyone on the 53-man roster can know how to run a coach-specific cover 2, cover 3, man-to-man coverage. Can they do their assignments right? The starters tend to get like the more intricate like blitz packages and like disguise coverages that you'll see in the regular season. And plus for like the Bears, they're playing the Bills or the Texans, I think. They're playing the Texans, and they face the Texans in week 2. So you don't want to give too much away as far as like defenses and offensive play calling. So that's why you're seeing some of the rookies thrive now, but I wouldn't look too much into it. You would want to see them in like weeks 4 and 5 after defenses have gotten a beat on what they can do in the first 3 games and what the offenses are trying to do in the first 3 games. So I'm here being cautiously optimistic on Caleb Williams. He could be the next Patrick Mahomes. He could also take 2 years to develop and lead the league in interceptions like Peyton Manning. You heard it from Nick Saban. So it's like temper your expectations in most of these rookies in general, because they are going to have ups and downs as the season wanes.
Yeah, I will say though, at least with Caleb Williams, something that was cool to see was him making like pre-snap reads and adjustments. I don't think we really like with Mitch Trubisky and then Justin Fields. I feel like moments like those are pretty far in between. Whereas, Caleb Williams, literally in his first preseason game, you can see him like audibling, changing hot routes for his receivers, which I think is a huge positive, even though it's like, vanilla defenses. Just the fact that he's, already making those kind of adjustments in a preseason game, I thought was pretty exciting for Bears fans.
Yeah, I know that's a valid thing to bring up. And I think one thing I saw in the QB school is the way he got out of the pocket and was like cognizant of where his hand placement was on the ball was really impressive to see. There's one play in particular where it's supposed to be a bootleg, I think, where he's like scrambles out. He finds a guy on the sideline. He throws it on a rope like 25 yards down the field. And the way he scrambles and holds his arm out as he's scrambling, so it's as far away from the defense as possible, is really, really top tier. Because like as a defensive end, you're looking for the strip sack, right? So as long as you can get around the quarterback's shoulders, the ball is probably somewhere between them because you're taught to keep the ball tucked to your chest, right? And defenders can play off of that. They're like, oh, if I'm about to sack the quarterback from his shoulder pads, I can reach over a little bit more and grab the ball. But if you're just extending the ball all the way out, that is much harder to deal with. That is much harder to get the ball and get the strip sack at most you can get the sack. So it's the little things that I'm also liking about Caleb Williams. But I want to see how he handles this guy's coverages, because he's mentioned in practice sometimes he struggled with that against Eberflus's defense. And maybe that's on purpose. Maybe Eberflus is doing this on purpose so you can see the worst it can get. But yeah, like all these rookies, there's some positives to see. You hate to see like JJ McCarthy go out with a meniscus tear. You hope it's not too serious. So best wishes and prayers up to JJ McCarthy. Hope he has a speedy recovery, because that's ideally you want to get all those reps in the preseason, and now he's not going to be able to. So hope he feels all right.
Yeah.
Okay, Corstian, ready to dive into some running backs?
I am. This was a really hard list to make. I was saying just a little bit before we started recording. I feel like the top maybe 6 guys, maybe 7 guys, I was pretty confident saying that, I like these 7, but then like 8 through 10 was really hard because I literally made a list of like another, I think like 8 guys after my 10 that I was struggling to fit in to this 8, 9, and 10 spot for me, which was really annoying because there's some players I'm like, ooh, do I like, especially at the number 10 spot, there was like 4 guys that I was still like cycling through until I'm just like, you know what, I'm just going to go with what I got now and come in with this list.
Yeah, it was really difficult for me too. My number 1 guy from last year is not even on this list, and it's not even his fault. Like he's out with a really serious injury, and I do not know how much of 2024 involvement he's going to have. So he was automatically off my list. Staple guide names that you would think would be on this list are not on my list because I want to see what they could do. They have the potential to vault into the top 10, but I looked at this seeing, combination of like what they did in 2023, but also what I'm projecting out in 2024. And there's a guy on this list I have who's dealing with a hamstring injury right now. So maybe my 10 spot might change, like depending on what that is. So I'll let you go ahead and get started here.
Yeah. Speaking of your last year's number 1 guy, when I first started making the list, I was like, oh, he's going to be my number 10 guy. Like, I feel like I can safely say that. But then I started making this list and I'm like, oh, dang it. Like, he might just have to be bumped out of this. But anyways, for my number 10 guy here, I think when he first came to this team, a lot of people questioned the reasoning why, he like in terms of draft stock, why he was taken so high. I think a lot of people thought they could have gotten this guy far later in the draft and thought this was a miss, especially just because they already had a decent 3-down back that they acquired in free agency, and the starter, he balled out anyways. I almost put him here, but the guy I have here at my 10th spot is Jahmyr Gibbs. He balled out last season. And the fact that, David Montgomery, who I think I was contemplating him putting right here too. I think Montgomery objectively had better stats overall, I think. But I feel like Gibbs was just a little bit more explosive and added more of like a scary factor to the offense that I had him at my number 10 spot here.
Yeah, and you almost read my mind because I also have Jahmyr Gibbs at number 10 right here. I was tempted to keep him higher just because like I think he could reach a good ceiling this year, having a year worth in the NFL. And for all the talk about last year with David Montgomery vaulting to a touchdown, like leading like running back in Detroit because of what Jamal Williams did the year before, Jahmyr Gibbs had 10 touchdowns, which is 10th in the league. And I think if you watch the Chargers game where he had a couple of explosive runs where he and Montgomery just went off that game last year, you could see the full talent. So I think it's going to be hard for him to get into the upper echelon if we were talking about fantasy for RB1 production. But he has the ability to be a detached receiver just like McCaffrey can be. And because you already have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta stood out, and then there's a bunch of untapped potential with Jameson Williams, there's a lot that he could do from the receiving game. And plus his interior running game is growing more and more and more, which is why I wanted to keep him on this list at number 10. So I think that was a great selection by you as well.
Yeah, he's like additionally talking about his receiving game. He had 316 receiving yards last season, which was 16th in the league last year. And so the fact that has just under 1,000 rush yards and is in the top echelon of receiving yards for running backs. He's like in this mix, you got guys like Samaje Perine, Tyjae Spears, Jalen Warren, Brian Robinson, who like are even like Jerome Ford ahead of him in receiving yards, but obviously they don't have quite the just straight up rushing upside, and so that's why it's just so incredible to see Gibbs have the rushing plus the receiving advantage that I think a lot of teams hope for.
Yeah, and he only had 3 fumbles last season. We're counting postseason and regular season, so he's a very reliable guy. he's not one of those like flashy guys where he gives you all or nothing, and
Mhm.
he's turnover prone. So a lot of untapped potential with him this second season. I'm really excited about him. Hopefully, he can heal from this hamstring injury the right way, because if he doesn't, I might be off of him just as quickly, because those can linger if you try to rush back from a hamstring injury. So
Mhm.
I hope he gets healthy. Who's your number 9 guy?
Number 9 guy, I was also really conflicted about putting him here. But I feel like in his short time in the league so far, he's done a really nice job. I think he's definitely surpassed expectations considering his draft stock. Um, but everybody calls him an angry runner. He, I think, adds a lot to his Super Bowl caliber team, and this is Isaiah Pacheco. The reason that I was like conflicted about this was he had he had like 935 rush yards. He had 244 receiving yards, which are pretty good, but they weren't necessarily like the cream of the top in both stats. But I think that he just added decent consistency to, I guess, the lack of receiving upside the Chiefs had last year, where I feel like there's games where the Chiefs, were reliant almost on Isaiah Pacheco to keep them in the games, just because the receiving room, until the emergence of Rashee Rice, did kind of, was a pretty flaky bit. And so I think just his consistency and just like the surefireness of, what you got with him, he's going to run hard for you every single play, had me confident enough to put him at my number 9 spot.
Yeah, and as a Rutgers graduate, I feel really bad that I don't have him in my top 10. With Pacheco, I like him a lot. I think the long speed hurts him for me, which is why I don't have him in this list. Because there's a lot of more dynamic backs I would probably take, but that doesn't mean he's not a good fit for the Chiefs. I think he's the perfect fit for the Chiefs. They needed somebody like that when they had Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Spencer Ware. They needed a guy that was tough. He's like the Marshawn Lynch that the Chiefs have right now. So if he had the long speed, that would just be the cherry on top. He could probably be a top 5 back. And plus, he's another guy where it's like he's a solid player, but I don't see him hitting a top 5 ceiling this year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's only because of like how the Chiefs structure their offense. And I think they're going to go back to a pass happy kind of team with the weapons they have now. And it's looking more and more like Rashee Rice is not going to get suspended. So there's just more opportunity now there. Even Marquise Brown, his injury is not as serious as it looked from the preseason. So I think they'll have a 3 wide receiver set, which could open some more opportunity for him. But I think the volume aspect is what kills him as far as like not being a top 5 fantasy ceiling. My number 9 guy can shoot up my board really quickly depending on how he does this year. But I think he needed to be considered in the top 10 after an incredible season that he had last year. It's weird because for his specific site, they have his preseason stats already. But in 2023, he had 237 carries, just over 1,100 yards, only 2 touchdowns. But you see the opportunity, and although his average yards per carry were less, I think he quickly became the focal point of this team as they made their 6-game winning streak turnaround. I have James Cook as number 9. I think he is vaulted from a guy that has sometimes used in a committee to a guy that's he can make occasional big plays and he could be the focal point of the offense. And I really love his patience to his game. He's not like his brother per se, but he has similar traits to his brother. I think he's another dual threat back. And I think he does have top 5 upside if they use Josh Allen less in the red zone. But he's like a dark horse to get there because of the threat that Josh Allen is anywhere inside the 20.
Yeah. James Cook, he was a guy, he just missed my top 10. A little bit of spoiler there. And I think the one thing that kept him off my list was I felt like while like you looking over his season stats looks really nice, and he's definitely like one of the highest performers in that regard. I felt like he had consistency issues for me where he'd have like a stretch of a couple like he'd have a stretch of a couple bad games, but he'd like rebound with a couple like unbelievably good games where you're thinking, for 4 games, he is the best running back in the league. But then you follow that with like 2 games or so that you're like, is he really the franchise back for this team? And so I just think that lack of consistency on like he has one of the highest ceilings. I think I agree with you on that point, but I think that amongst my list of guys here, it felt like he had a lower floor than than the rest of my top 10, which had him kind of just bounced right outside of there. But I definitely see why you have him at number 9. I think that he could be a guy that ends up being like top 5 this year too.
Yeah, and to your point, he's only had 3 games where he was above 100 yards this year. Mm-hmm. But like he has the Cowboys and the Raiders. See, like he combined for like 300 yards, basically 302 yards. Mm-hmm. So like for me, it's a volume thing. If he's gonna get 18 to 20 carries, I think it could chalk him up for at least 70 yards a game, plus what he can do in the air. So it's like he might not get the yardage totals, but I think his receiving prowess is going to be a lot more realized when you don't have a Stephon Diggs and you still have receivers that are yet to establish themselves. So you could see him being used like a Jahmyr Gibbs, but with more like rushing touches, which is why I have him above Gibbs on my list.
Mm-hmm. A second. There we go. Okay. Let's see. Now for my number 8 player, I feel like this guy, he's slept on a decent bit. I think he's the second best running back from his class off the top of my head, at least going for this draft class a couple of years ago. He was very much a 1A, 1B with the other rookie running back that I think is higher on my list. But he has been consistently good, I think, for his team the past little bit. And then the team last year, they went and drafted, I think, another running back in the second round. And the fact that he held him off and was pretty much still the dominant lead back kind of was a testament to me how good he was. And this being Kenneth Walker. He last season, he also had just over 900 rushing yards like the other 2 guys on my list so far. It was kind of a down year for running backs, I'd say, where only like 5 or 6 running backs, I think, had over 1,000 rush yards. And then on the receiving end, he had 259 receiving yards. Pretty sure he missed a couple games because I know Zach Charbonnet, the rookie that was drafted in the second round, I think he had the opportunity to start like a game or 2. And so there's definitely opportunity for Kenneth Walker to reach 1,000 rush yards this season. But I feel like he's just been kind of another staple of consistency for the Seahawks offense, especially I think the past game last year had a little bit of a step back from the year before. But I feel like Kenneth Walker was just another guy that was able to keep the team in games regardless of how the pass attack was.
Yeah, no, this is a great pick because I remember him coming out of Michigan State. He was one of my favorite running backs coming out as well. The thing that kept him off my list was, I think, the change in the offensive system. They're going completely away from Shane Waldron to Ryan Grubb, and I think that's a complete question mark that I'm not sure how he's going to get used, because having Charbonnet there complicates things, where it's like it could favor Charbonnet depending on what kind of run calls are being had, or it could go to Walker if Grubb prefers to have like a dominant running back 1 and that's it. So I think the uncertainty keeps him off my list, and that's the only reason why. He absolutely has top 10 potential this year if he's used like it. So if he's getting 15 to 17 carries, I feel very confident about this. But I think also part of it's like, is the passing offense going to rebound? Because unless the Seahawks put a focus on JSN, unlike what they did last year, I don't think the type of offense they're going to implement is going to benefit Walker, because I think he'll thrive if you have JSN, DK, and Tyler on the field, because you create that more space for him to operate. Whereas with Charbonnet, I feel like he can succeed even if there's like 2 tight ends on the field more often. Not to say that Kenneth Walker can't. I think it's very dependent on what the Seahawks do in the first 3 games. So he is kind of like an iffy player for me. So I thought I'd just keep him off. A guy that's number 8 on my list had a lot of hype going into last season, just based on the offensive pieces around him. But there were some. I'm going to charge my computer real quick. But it seemed like a disappointing season, even though he was 24 yards away from a 1,000-yard rushing season. Only had 4 touchdowns. But one of the most dynamic spin moves you will ever see against the Jaguars in London. This guy has tons of potential written all over him to be a top 3 back this year, especially with the new offensive changes. It's Bijan Robinson out of Atlanta. He's my own number 8 guy. I could have easily had him higher on my list, but I think some of the guys ahead of him are more established and have more productivity. That I'm like, I'll keep him on here for now, but he can land anywhere from 3 to 8 on this list, and it's all dependent on him and how the offense uses him. So he's my number 8 guy for me.
Yeah, he was really good last year. I feel like I think with a new offense installed, we'll see him get a bit more in both both rushing and receiving stats here. Because I felt like the offense was committed to like having other running backs like kind of get theirs in the system, which isn't like awful. I mean, they did well regardless, but I think that he'll have just more opportunity to better. So, but yeah, I do think that. I mean, he's a top 10 guy. Obviously, it's kind of like a mini spoiler for me, but yeah, he was really good. I wish I had him in like all my fantasy leagues, but I don't. So, oh well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm counting here the weeks. He's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He had 7 games where he only had 10 to 12 carries in this offense. So I think his top 3 potential relies on if that's bumped up to 15. 15 should be the minimum you give this guy. I would think 20 is like the average number of carries you should have per game, honestly. You can still build an explosive offense out of that, but you got to use this guy more. So the reason he's number 8 for me, the talent is top 3, but it's the usage. He's not used nearly enough in the running game. Excited about.
Yeah. Then going to my number 7 guy, I have a guy. He was like hurt a decent chunk of the year. And so I think had he been healthy all year, he probably would have been higher on my list. But in the time that he did play, I think he played exceptionally well. He averaged about 74.1 rush yards a game, which ended up being like 5th in the NFL. And with that, he still had, and so he played he played 10 games last year. He still managed to get 741 rush yards, meaning that 74.1 average a game. But this is Jonathan Taylor. I think, obviously he was injured last year, but he's still a baller. I don't think really much has changed to negatively affect the production that he'll have this upcoming season. There isn't, Zach Moss riding on his coattails this year either. I think if Zach Moss stayed, obviously Jonathan Taylor's the 1A regardless, but Zach Moss definitely would have eaten into his carries. Now this year you got Trey Sermon, who is still a question mark, and then you have Evan Hull behind that, which is again another big question mark. He hasn't really had much play time, and so it's like Jonathan Taylor likely, is dominating touches here. I don't know if he'll replicate that 74 yards yards a game, but he dominated last year in his 10 games, and I think he continues to do so.
Yeah, he's a guy I got screwed over in fantasy last year. But like I know it's been a couple seasons since his 1,800-yard rushing season, but this This is a guy that has top 3 potential
Mm-hmm.
in the league as well. Still, and I think it's because of the presence of Anthony Richardson and all the young talents on the Colts. And I think because of Richardson's ability, this guy has as much high ceiling as like other dynamic backs and like other offenses that I'm going to bring up soon. So Taylor's higher on my board. Spoiler alert there. Just because he's had had at least 2 seasons of like having at least 1,100 yards, and he's flirted close to that. It's seemed like it's a downward trajectory, but I don't think it's his fault. I think it's been injuries that have gotten in the way. So for me, I am not worried about Jonathan Taylor in the least bit. I can see why you have him 7th because obviously injuries suck, and you can't really assess a player properly if he's injured. The other guy I have at 7 is a guy that also dealt with injuries. These preseason stats are throwing me for a loop here. Trying to go through the game log. And although his offensive situation is not as good as Jonathan Taylor's, I do think there were some off-field distractions that he could have had, and the fact that this team did not have an offensive tackle that could play for his life that literally hampered the entire offense. I've never seen a situation like that before. This is a guy that became a focal point in his rookie season and has exploded from there. And while stats don't scream out anything really that great, I think he's due for a rebound season just because of the surrounding cast that is getting better and better and better. For me, it's Alvin Kamara added to New Orleans. I still think this is a guy that is capable of having 1,100, 1,200 yard season. Like, I don't think Kendrick Miller is going to cause him to go away. I like Kendrick Miller, but I don't think Alvin Kamara is going away. I think the offense will be a little bit better. I think the rapport between Carr and Olave will help complement what Kamara can do, so Kamara can be more effective in his touches. And yeah, I still like the ceiling on this guy. I think he might not be top 3, like a couple of guys I mentioned, like as in Bijan and Taylor, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's flirting on top 5 in the top 5 season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited for Alvin Kamara this year too. He's one of those guys that just missed my top 10 as well. And this, honestly, just because it's such a tight competition for this top 10, I think. I think, like obviously injuries or whatever happened, but the crazy thing I think with him is the fact that he had 466 receiving yards last season, which was 6th in the league last year for running backs, which I think was really insane. And that's what, because I think prior to seeing his receiving stats, he was probably around my 15-ish range probably. But then, obviously he's a great rusher. But then just seeing how well he did in the pass game still kind of had me just around that 9, 10. I think he's probably my 12 if I were to just put it off the top of my head right now. But yeah, he's really good.
I mean, for me, it's literally the offensive line. I don't think it's his fault the numbers he's winning right now. I do think Clint Kubiak being the offensive coordinator there is going to help him out a ton because you're going to see more zone running, which I think will suit a more dynamic player like Kamara better. So I think that potential is going to help his rushing numbers. He had sub 700 yards last season. I don't expect that out of Alvin Kamara going into this season. If I know he's playing 12, if he's playing 12 games, he's not having 700 rushing yards. He's having way more. So
yeah,
I think his situation will be slightly better going into next season.
Yeah, and then also I've heard somewhat negative news out of the Kendrick Miller camp, from the Saints camp. That just being that Miller has been struggling with injuries pretty much from the get-go since he's been drafted. And I think one of the coaches had talked about just how it's hard to evaluate Miller as a viable threat for this offense when he literally is not playing in practice or in preseason games. And so I think if Miller is the future of this offense in terms of the running back room, he still has a long way to go before I think we start to see him really dip into Alvin Kamara's touches either.
That's fair.
Okay, now going into my number 6 player, right? This is a player that's been talked about already, just in general during this podcast so far. I think he really balled out. I've been mentioning the receiving yards a lot, just because I feel like a lot of these guys just, like I feel like the rushing yards were really close for this top 10 list of my guys, even like the top 15. It's really close in the rushing yards, and so I feel like these receiving yards really separate these guys for me. And this guy, he had 487 receiving yards, which I was unaware of, which was, I think, fourth amongst running backs. It was fourth amongst running backs this year, which for a player that I thought was slightly underutilized was really amazing. This is Bijan Robinson. I think you kind of really said it all so far about Bijan. I think, he just continues to get more touches this year, elevating the stats that we see out of him. And so, I don't know how much more there is to add for him for me, but yeah, he's really good.
Yeah, I said what I said about Bijan. I think he's a guy that I could have put anywhere between 3 to 8. I think it's really what's hurting him the most was the offensive usage and the fact he's going to his second season compared to some of the guys I have above him. So maybe a little bit biased, and I've just seen more production out of Alvin Kamara and then the guys I'm going to mention like coming up. So for that reason, I have him there, but he can surpass them all this season with a really, really, really excellent season. My number 6 guy led the league in carries last year. He had a little over 1,100 yards, and when I saw his stats, he had 12 touchdowns as well. When I saw his stats, I was surprised because I was like, I expected this guy to be rated higher in fantasy circles, especially if you look at his game logs. And he's going into a better situation. But I think his age is what's scaring people off of him because, oh no, if you hit age 30, suddenly you're just going to decline. Man, I don't think it's true for a player with his play style because I think he's walking into the perfect situation. And all these backs I'm about to mention are literally going to walk into situations where they can be the bell cow or they can be a highly efficient player, even if their touches are 12 to 15. For me, it's Derrick Henry. And I felt like when I rated him here, I was way too low. But I think why I kept him here is because he's not as dynamic as the other backs I have above him. But what's more impressive to me is that he still produces like a dynamic running back, which is why I have him ahead of guys like Alvin Kamara and Jahmyr Gibbs. I think with him and Lamar Jackson, it's going to be a pick your poison type of deal where it's like, would I be surprised if Derrick Henry has above 1,300 rushing yards next season? Nope. I really don't. And he's going towards the end of the first round or beginning of the second round in drafts. And I'm just like, why? Why? This guy literally led the league in carries, second in rushing yards in a really non-ideal situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's really impressive about him. I don't think you can have a top 10 list without Derrick Henry. And that's saying a lot because for me, I don't like backs that are not as dynamic like he is. But the fact that he's been able to produce better numbers than most of them, you have to give credit to the man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that Derrick Henry. I think partially tied into age. I think it's just we've seen his yards per game go down the past couple seasons. Because I think it's steadily decreased the past couple of years. Where obviously there was that 2,000 yard season, so it's obviously it'll naturally go down from that. But because I think it was and it was in the 90s, then it was in the 80s, and now his yards per game was 68 last season. And so I think the trend of just the decrease is what scares people away, which is a valid concern. But I do also agree that he's entering a much better situation. Granted, we may obviously Lamar will eat into some of those kind of rush attempts, but this is also a very run heavy offense anyways. So even if Lamar's getting an 800 yard rushing season, we've seen in the past, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins have also had their fair share amount of carries and have combined between those two are in the thousands of rushing yards for rushing. So yeah, I think Derrick Henry will probably continue to eat there. Then going on to my number 5 guy, it was kind of weird ranking this guy. Like I think before the start of last season, I don't think anybody would have had considered him in the top 10 list, much less the top 20 list of running backs. I think a lot of people were not in on the hype for this guy here. He didn't necessarily play the entire season. I think it was he had 12 games played. But I think the craziest thing about him was in those 12 games, he averaged 95 yards per game, which was mind-boggling to me. And I'm like, this guy's having 95 rush yards a game, more than Christian McCaffrey. It's crazy. And this guy being Kyren Williams. It was just crazy to see that this guy was so efficient as a runner. He was averaging just straight up, he was averaging 5 yards a carry as well, which was an excellent number. I don't think a lot of people were anticipating him to be one of the breakout running backs of the year last season. I think he won a decent amount of people championships, or at least led them to the championship. And I think the one thing that had me not put him at 1, 2, 3, or 4 was just the lack of game. He was out for 5 games. And so it's how durable can he last a full season? Because the year prior, when Cam Akers was there, obviously he wasn't that great, and so he didn't really, they didn't give him a full workload 2 years ago, and then last year, you give him the workload. He's out for 5 games. So that's kind of the question mark. And then they brought in Blake Corum, who I think he'll be really good. I think he has a decent shot of eating into some of these touches that Kyren Williams is getting as well. Obviously, Corum's still technically unproven, so for all we know, Corum sucks, and Kyren Williams has a repeat of next season and is a top 3 running back. But at this point, I think 5 is still phenomenal. He's a 5th, in my opinion, the 5th best back in the league. Not much more you can ask about that. But that's kind of where I had him.
Yeah, Kyren didn't make my list. I think I want to see one more season out of him to put him in top 10, just because he had so many flaws coming out of college. And I want to see if this is repeatable. And I feel like the Rams drafted Blake Corum because they don't want to give Kyren Williams that volume and subject him to injury woes that they were worried about them last season. So part of the reason he didn't make my list is I'm looking at this in 2024, and I could easily see Blake Corum pull a Kyren Williams on Kyren Williams. So because I think Blake Corum has the best talent in the entire backfield. And saying that, I've been wrong on Cam Akers. I've been wrong on Zach Evans. I could be wrong on Blake Corum, for all I know. You could be right. You could be rightfully having him at 5. And as great of an efficient season as he had last season, I don't think that's repeatable, especially if you think about the factors that played a role. Puka Nacua also had an extraordinary season for a rookie. That doesn't mean I think it's repeatable. I think the presence of Cup being more healthy is going to lean on less volume for Kyren Williams, plus Corum coming in. And if Puka's more healthy, I could easily see this being a passing script that only allows 20 carries total, and not all of them are going to Kyren. So I think less volume, plus more talented players coming in are going to hurt him. But with that said, he could another good season. He's in my top 10 automatically. I have.
Yeah, I think barring Blake Corum plays in a way that puts him on the top 10 list next year, the worst we probably see it for Kyren Williams would be a 60-40 split in terms of touches.
I agree.
And so even that, even with the lesser touches, he's still, I think, going to be insanely efficient with whatever touches he gets. And so maybe his floor still would be maybe 12 for me if he's getting that 60% touches in this backfield out of the 2. But then, I think that's, again, his floor in terms of touches. And so it'll at least, again, barring insane Blake Corum breakout year, rookie year, I still feel like Kyren gets a decent majority of the touches in the backfield. He was down technically in the receiving game with only 206 receiving yards, but I think Blake Corum prototypes better as a bell cow back. And so in terms of who's going to get the receiving touches out of the two, I still think Kyren probably has the slight edge on that, but we'll see how the things play, especially with Sean McVay.
And I think even with the situation too, like the running backs aren't typically asked to go on separate routes. They literally are the play action decoy for like a guy like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. So you're not really going to see Kyren Williams going too many routes unless it's for screens or unless it's for like play action leaks after the fake. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's partially Kyren Williams' fault, but at the same time, when you have a guy like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, would you rather give Kyren the ball through the air or would you rather give it to those two dynamic demons? I think I would pick the receivers there. Like, I still think this offense goes heavily towards the receivers, and the receivers create the space for the running back. So, especially in the Rams offense. So, I think I don't know what to make of the situation. It's going to depend on the first 3 games for me. Mm-hmm. It's one of those where it's like Kyren being in the top 10 determines on like how the first 3 to 4 games go for the Rams. Mm-hmm. My number 5 guy made his way over after outstanding season last year and the year before that. Just looking at his stats year by year, had an incredible year in 2022, had an incredible rookie season for the name change for this team, had 12 touchdowns in 2022. Last season, only played in 13 games, but despite that, cleared 800 yards, was pretty dynamic with the ball in his hands. You would hope to have like higher expectations for him going into 2023, but I think he's in an exciting situation now with a great young quarterback and great young receiver sets. And although this team expected to keep his franchise running back this season and lost it to a division rival, I think even though he projects as a different type of player, I think this guy could still be the bell cow of the offense. And whether or not a rookie is split with him in the backfield, I think he could still be very successful. Bonafide top 5 guy for me, Josh Jacobs, running back for the Green Bay Packers. I really like the situation this year. I think we can see him go back to an 1,100, 1,200 yard season. He has all the tools to be able to do that. Plus, he gives more dynamicism than what the Packers have with A.J. Dillon. So I really like his prospects this season.
Yeah. He was a player that stressed me out in terms of ranking. I feel like he's not on my top 10 list. I felt like I should have put him on here, but I was like, at least looking at last season, he balled out, but like his efficiency, I felt like was pretty poor. And so that's kind of the one thing that like knocked him off my list personally. I do think that this upcoming season, he could have a really nice bounce back year. Wouldn't be surprised to see him, like you said, with a 1,100 yard rushing season. I think a lot of these running backs that were just under like 1,000 rush yards will see 1,000 rush yard seasons, as long as they are playing the entire season. I think, Josh Jacobs as well doesn't have too much competition really behind him. I know there's a lot of talk about Marshawn Lloyd being kind of redshirted in this offense for a year. And then I know A.J. Dillon has kind of sucked last season, and he's kind of being played down a lot from what I've heard from like camp talk from the Packers. And so it seems like Wilson is like the one real competitor, I think, to at least not take the job, but like, pull touches away from us, Josh Jacobs. And so I really like this pick here. He's not on my top 10, but I have 0 issues with him being like top 5. Even if you had him at like 4, I think I wouldn't really complain. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Number 4 then. It's not Josh Jacobs.
Yeah. So going to my number 4 player, he's also a player we talked about. Seems like I'm just ranking some of your guys just a little bit higher or something. I don't know. But he had a good, like technically down compared to prior seasons, but still a phenomenal season. Last season, he was number 2 in rushing. I think you already know who he is now. But yeah, he balls out. I think he'll have a phenomenal year next season. I think he'll, outperform what he did this current season, this being Derrick Henry. I mean, like, sure, he's like 31, but I feel like he's one of those outlier type of running backs, kind of like Frank Gore, in terms of, age doesn't affect him as much as I think a lot of other running backs. And I think the fact that we've seen Derrick Henry ball out in his late 20s into his 30s is a testament to, like, he is not going to leave this list until he leaves, until he's bad. Like, so, like, if he balls out this year, and he's going into his, is a 32-year-old next season, maybe he's slightly lower just with age, but, like, again, he's still going to make that top 10. And then if he's 33 years old and he has 1,000 rushing yard season with over 4 yards a carry, I think he makes this list until he's not doing those. And so I think that's just, like, the testament to how amazing Derrick Henry has been throughout his career. I don't know when his fall off will be. There's a chance that he just retires still balling out, just because he's that good. But yeah, I have him at my number 4. I think he has the potential to be lead this way in the league as the number 4 back.
If he's not stiff arming guys or trucking guys on the way to 30-yard gains, then I think I can take him off this list. It's just because of his play style is still so effective, which is crazy to me. Absolutely crazy to me. No, my number 4 guy is a guy we already talked about as well. It's Jonathan Taylor. I really like his prospects this season. I think I have him really high on this list because with the presence of Anthony Richardson and the read option, dual option, I think he is due for a massive, massive season. I think this whole Colts is due for a massive season. You really see what kind of talent Anthony Richardson is, and the combination of his rushing ability plus what Shane Steichen has proven to do with mobile QBs like this is only going to help out the efficiency of Jonathan Taylor. I think he's the best back that Shane Steichen's ever had, and I think it's going to show itself this season with more competent quarterback play there.
I like that pick. Obviously, he's in my top 10 too. You just had him higher, which I think is super valid. Yeah, like literally, I think Jonathan Taylor, he plays a full season last year. He's probably at my number 4 spot too or something. So, I mean, like, injury really isn't that big of a knock because obviously he's still in my top 10. But good pick. I like it. Going to my number 3 guy. I feel like from the get-go, he has balled out. Obviously, at his rookie year, he suffered from I think an ACL or something, and so even though he was balling out the first couple of weeks, he kind of missed the rest of his season, which is unfortunate. But since then, he's been the focal point for his team, regardless of kind of the talent that's been there or lack of talent that's been there, I guess. But he had just under 1,000 rushing yards. Literally couldn't have given him like a 6-yard carry or something. But this is Breece Hall for the Jets. He was technically 13th in rush yards last season, but every time the ball's in his hands, you gotta worry that some breakout play is gonna happen. Like, Breece Hall is amongst this list is a guy that I think on a weekly basis has the threat of just decimating a team's defense, regardless of how good that defense may be. It's just really hard to stop him. Like, he balls out. He had amongst this list though, he technically did have one of the lowest yards per game, that 58 yards a game. But I think it's pretty easy to see why teams would stack the box on him when you got Zach Wilson as your quarterback, probably looking at your mom in the stadium instead of playing the game or something. I don't know, but so when you got Zach, this kind of weaker quarterback play, it's obvious that you're going to be relied on. And, despite teams basically, stacking the box and whatnot pretty much every week, he's putting up pretty much 1,000 rush yards on the season. And then the craziest thing too is he had 591 receiving yards, which I think was the most amongst running backs in the league. Like there's potential with like healthy Aaron Rodgers next season. He could be I think he's a potential 1,000-yard rushing, 1,000-yard receiving, or close to maybe a 2,000 total scrimmage yard. Maybe like 1,200 rush yards, 800 receiving yards or something is the potential there. And I think with my top three guys, similar type potentially having 2,000-yard scrimmage total seasons is in the realm of reality for these guys.
Yeah, same here. And that's kind of the same thinking I had with these top three as well. My number 3 running back also just almost had 1,000 yards rushing. He actually led the league in receiving yards last season. He plays in the New York Jets as well.
Oh.
It's actually Breece Hall. So I also had him number 3 for all the reasons you mentioned. He's the most, just to add on to what you said, he's the most elusive back on this list. I think every time he touches the ball, he's going for a touchdown. And I think about this for one other guy as well on this list. And I think, like you mentioned, with the fact that you have Aaron Rodgers there, he's going to check into the most optimal runs for Breece Hall. So I think you're going to see way more 60-yard gains than he did last season, which is crazy. Because you think about his last game, he had like 178 yards last season on 37 carries. That is wild. If you can make Aaron Rodgers throw the ball less and not move around as much because Breece Hall is going off, that's a good thing for the Jets. And I think you're still going to see the volume, even though the passing game will be loads better than last season. Plus, you're not going to have Aaron Rodgers scrambling into the end zone off a torn Achilles as much. So the touchdown upside is there for him as well. He's the guy you should take in your top half of the first rounds in fantasy, bar none. Breece Hall is also number 3 for me.
Yeah. I have a sneaking suspicion that our 1, 2, and 3 player may be the same in that exact order.
Me too.
Just thinking of like, there's no possible way you could leave these next 2 guys off this list. And then there's also no possible way you don't do a 1, 2, 3 order with these guys. So how about, I don't want to, okay. So with my number 2 guy here, he balled out last season, I think, despite, I think, his team just kind of being a dumpster fire. And he recently switched over to a division rival, which I think has one of, if not the best offensive lines in the league. You know, like they lost their previous running back who had like 1,000 rush yards, I think. It was incredibly efficient, which surprised me. But like, could have been better. Kind of was like still felt inconsistent. But now you're getting this guy Saquon Barkley, just an unbelievable talent. The fact that he's been putting up, you know, top of the line, like top tier running back numbers with the Giants, I think is insane. And now he's going to be on the Eagles. I touchdowns may drop just due to Jalen Hurts usage in red zone packages, but I still think that in terms of yardage, he's going to absolutely kill it. Because I feel like last season there was like the knock on Jalen Hurts. I feel like there would be a few games where like the receiving or the pass attack wasn't quite connecting. And so sometimes, DeAndre Swift was able to, carry and ball out a game here and there. That would kind of alleviate the stresses that the lack of pass attack would happen sometimes. But now, if Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown aren't connecting one game, it's literally not an issue anymore. Saquon Barkley is going to absolutely devastate defenses. You cannot stack the box with this team, and you can't just like run full nickel dime packages on this team either, which makes it insane how good Saquon Barkley is. But that's my number 2.
Yeah, my number 2 guy was the leading rusher on the dumpster fire team. He was the best player on the team, which says a lot. And then he got picked up by a division rival in free agency. It is also Saquon Barkley. I'm really high on this guy. I actually think he could be the number 1 going into next season. If he has the kind of season I think he's going to he's going to have. He's being ranked lower than CeeDee Lamb and Ja'Marr Chase right now in fantasy drafts. I can't understand it. This guy has as much of a ceiling as Christian McCaffrey does, and that's the 1 year I can say that about Saquon, given that he's in the most ideal situation that he is in now. Man, oh man. This is the best offensive line and skill position players you've ever had to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, like, again, I want to say this again because I said this about Jonathan Taylor. I said this about Derrick Henry. Saquon's in the best position because he has better offensive lines than both, and he has as good of a dual threat quarterback as those two guys. Maybe not from the rushing side as Lamar Jackson that Derrick Henry has, but Saquon's younger. He's more athletic, and he's just turning 27. Mm-hmm. Depending on how long he's on the Eagles, I think you're going to see prime Saquon Barkley. Like this is like the career-making years that you're about to see out of him. Mm-hmm. If you could trade for him somehow in Dynasty, I would do it. I would fork over first-round picks just for this guy. You're about to see payback time, a vengeful season from Saquon Barkley. Book it for 500 yards total against the Giants this season because the guy is going to go bananas.
Saquon's so good. Yeah, and a lot of my fantasy, I've joined a couple of public leagues just because I was bored. And each one of those, I think I was pick 8 or 10 in both of them, and literally I just got Saquon on both of them. Like I feel like he's
going way too low. He's going way too low. He cannot be going 8 or 10. Are you kidding me?
I'd be willing to take him around that 5-6 spot. It's crazy. Granted, there's insane receiver talent that's going to be going at the top of the draft, which is understandable, but still,
you're still going to get that talent in the 4th round. You're still going to get Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. You're still going to get really good receivers. At 4th and 5th round. I don't get why you're taking CeeDee Lamb or Ja'Marr Chase over Saquon. I really don't. I really don't, because the drop off between those two, and then maybe a Justin Jefferson that's going later than them because of the quarterback downgrade. I would still pick Justin Jefferson if he's going 2nd round. I would still pick AJ Brown, who's probably going 2nd round again this year. Over CeeDee Lamb and Ja'Marr Chase. And I don't care that AJ Brown and Saquon are on the same team. They're both on good offenses. So it's how many running – we struggled to come up with the top 10. And you're telling me you'd still rather pick CD and Ja'Marr Chase when we're probably going to struggle next season to put a top 10 together with receivers just because there's so much of receiving talent. So,
yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. If he keeps falling to me in drafts, I'll take him. But yeah. So now I'm going to my number 1 guy. We talked about how the number 2 and 3 could potentially have a 2,000-yard scrimmage season. Well, my number 1 guy, I'm assuming your number 1 guy, also literally had a 2,000-yard season. It's none other than Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey. Is there more that you need to say about Christian McCaffrey than he is Christian McCaffrey? He was healthy pretty much all season, right? He missed 1 game. He averaged 91 yards a game last season, totaling 1,459 rush yards, and then he had 564 receiving yards, which is crazy, especially when you look at the talent on the 49ers. The fact that he demands the touches that he gets is pretty crazy to see. I feel like when I was thinking about this list, I was obviously Christian McCaffrey number 1. Yep.
What more can I say? Unfortunately, he did not make my top 10 list. My number 1 guy is Evan Hall out of the Indianapolis Colts. No, just kidding. I also have Christian McCaffrey. Absolute game breaker. If you bet that he would score a touchdown, in most games last season, you would have cashed out immediately. because this guy was just a touchdown machine. I think he had 14 last season.
14 rushing touchdowns.
14 rushing. Yeah, and then how much did he have receiving? 7?
7.
So he pretty much had a touchdown every game. Like, it was ridiculous what he did. And you spoke to him on the talent. Despite having the talent around him, he was still the best option on the team. Like, he's a do-it-all back. He's been doing it year after year after year, which is why he's my number one back. The reason why I said Saquon can overtake him this year is because Saquon's more physical than Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey's gotten better at running inside the tackles, especially in the red zone area. But I think Saquon is just you can put him in any situation. The problem with Saquon is he hasn't been doing it for as long as Christian McCaffrey, and he hasn't had the situation that Christian McCaffrey's had. Christian McCaffrey, the one thing that would cement him at number one is the Super Bowl. If he gets that, all bets are off. He's probably number one until he drops off. So for me, he's number one for now, and if he continues being himself, he'll probably stay there. But I mean, this list can change next season. Last season, I had Nick Chubb on top of Christian McCaffrey because I just thought Nick Chubb was the best rusher I've ever seen in my life, and he probably definitely would have been top 5 on this list too. But I think the injury concerns are real from college to now, where I can't have him in my top 10 because of that. Because it's that severe, the injuries he suffered in the Steelers game, that he might not be the same player ever again. And it's sad because one of the best talents in the game got screwed over in the quarterback situation, and now he's not on the list. But with Christian McCaffrey, I think regardless of the quarterback, he still balled out. Now you have a top 10 quarterback in his own right with Brock Purdy, in my opinion. This guy's going to have another ballistic season, whether or not the Ayuk trade to the Steelers comes to fruition. I think he's that good of a player. I think he's still capable of carrying the load on offense. This guy is just a bona fide baller.
The name itself is just a testament to how good he is. Everybody knows it's Christian McCaffrey.
Corstian wants a statue of Christian McCaffrey outside of ESPN fantasy halls, so I don't blame him. That's it. That's our list, guys. So no outlandish takes here, other than the fact that probably that I didn't have Kyren Williams in my top 10, and that you left somebody off your list that was top 10 that I was just like, what the heck are you doing?
I know I was missing Cook and Kamara off mine,
and Josh Jacobs, but that's okay. That's okay. It wasn't as bad as saying Patrick Mahomes was a number one and that CJ Stroud was in top 10. So I'll let you out the hook this week.
You know what's crazy though? For this week, James Conner almost made my top 10. I was contemplating him at my number 10 spot here.
I love James Conner. I love his story, but yours, stop it. You want to hear something crazy though about his season in terms of efficiency?
He averaged 80 yards a game rushing. That he was he had over 1,000 yards rushing. He was averaging 5 yards a carry. He was, decent with the rushing touchdowns. It was more so if he had 300 receiving yards, he probably would have made this top 10 list. But
he probably would have made this list if he stays healthy. That's the thing with him. You got to stay healthy. You just got to stay healthy.
Yeah. Granted, I don't think I think there's okay, I have to look now. Just a second. There's 3 people I think on my list here that played all 17 games. 3.
But see, with Connor, he's been doing this year after year. He's been getting hurt year after year. Most of these guys on this list have at least played 17 games once, or they just did this past season, or they're about to realize their ceiling. So it's with Conner, he's a solid player. I'm not trying to disrespect James Conner, but I will not have him top 10 if I have guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor on this list.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just a different tier.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a depth guy you want in your fantasy team, but there's levels to this. So, respectfully, I don't know what you were thinking with James Conner.
he was not on my top 10 list, though, so I would just think he almost made it.
The fact that he almost made it raises a lot of questions for me and doubts, but I'm just messing around with Corstian here in the wee hours. Thank you guys for watching episode 94. Follow us on Instagram at amon.a.mission down below. We definitely won't forget that this time. Follow us at Amon Mission on our YouTube channel. I'm going to get some nice rolled out content for you before the season starts. Do it now. Follow the page now. And we're going to be talking about our top 10 wide receivers list. Going to be, if you thought this list was hard to make, the wide receivers list is going to be really fun to do, but really hard to make for us. We're probably going to disrespect a couple players along the way. But with that, see you guys next week.
Yeah.
Can't wait to talk about it.
Peace. Will it work?
Ooh, denied.
No.
Denied.
Oh, there we go.